The mic is just coming.
You talked of conflict situations and development. I just want to take your attention to West Africa. Take Burkina Faso or Mali. Constant conflict and therefore very little development. And what takes place is a political party comes into power. The elite siphons off the benefits to itself. There's a military coup. The elite again takes siphons off the benefits to itself, and no development takes place. And development, as you've rightly argued, is an internal matter. How will you apply one of your development models to that kind of situation? And your triple nexus there has not worked, because the infrastructure there is okay in the cities. You go beyond the cities, nothing exists. And these countries got independent in the 60s. That development model, the triple nexus that you so well outlined, has not worked.
Thank you. Shall we take two more and then we, gentleman here?
Yeah, Ambassador Balakrishnan, let's talk a bit about Syria, which is really, we are approaching a time when Syria will be ripe for rebuilding and reconstruction, if peace comes. I've spent more than 3 years there, I know the country well. Somehow the humanitarian assistance community, the formal community, has not really leveraged the Syrian diaspora. Syrian diaspora is extremely strong and has a lot of resources. And it is one of the most effective agents for humanitarian assistance as well as development of Syria. So I was just wondering whether you have a formal approach to the diaspora. And this is a general thing, it can apply in other countries also. The other aspect is that both in development and humanitarian effort, engaging with local community groups, especially women, is one of the most effective ways of delivering development. So whether this has been taken into account.
Thank you. I'm going to take one for.
I don't want to monopolize this table. My name is Joy Bhattacharya. This is to Professor Caronier, of course. In your presentation, you outlined your methodology and I may even say theology. But sometimes in this world, practical world that you live in, you come across forces and ideologies that are by definition, and their raison d'etre is opposition to all forms of human progress and thought since the French Revolution. Whatever ideas, whatever progress humanity has made, there are forces in the world which are resolutely opposed to that. Now, how do you reconcile your approach? How do you confront these ideologies and forces? Is it a Mexican standoff, or do you have a solution to it?
Thank you. 3 very interesting points coming up. So, Jill, over to you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for your question, which are tricky and interesting question. So let me start with West Africa. Indeed, there is. I was discussing yesterday with a Ghanaian participant to Raisina, who is now in Korea, South Korea, and he was reminding me that independence struck. Well, the two countries became kind of independent and started development, autonomous development at the same time. But when you see the situation today, it's very different when you compare South Korea and Ghana. Now, when you go to Niger, Chad, Mali, and all these other countries, these are countries which have become, unfortunately, major operational contexts for the International Committee of the Red Cross. And we have taken over a number of activities from development organization and the state, which had been developed for decades in more peaceful contexts, but which either broke down very quickly or could be maintained, but what we really learned the hard way is the only way to maintain these, development gains that were previously done is to work directly with local communities and all the local actors, including local authorities. And this brings me a bit to the question of our distinguished colleagues who spoke of these forces which are not pro-development or which oppose any outside intervention. What we learned is that when we have to work with authorities, sometimes those who exert authority and power over the population and over the vital infrastructure and systems are not state actors. So what do you do? And this is where I think development actors, and especially UN development actors, would not feel at ease because it's not their mandate to start to work and engage non-state actors which de facto exert authority over population and territory, but de jure are not representative of a state. Under international humanitarian law, the first IHL applies to non-state actors and not only to state actors, which is a distinctive feature under international law of IHL. Second, the International Committee of the Red Cross has a mandate to protect and assist people even in the midst of war. And when we have to find solutions in terms of survival and maintaining development gains, which are absolutely essential for survival, we have to engage. So I don't say that it is easy because in each and every places, I was mentioning Tripoli in Libya, but of course in the Sahel and in Syria, engaging the actors in order to have access and just to be able to operate without being attacked is highly challenging. So we as a neutral, purely neutral humanitarian organization don't pass a formal ethical judgment on parties to a conflict. It's not our role. Our role is to determine who exerts actual authority over population and territory. And when I say actual, I mean de facto. And then to see how much we have to engage in order, A, to be able to operate in the region, and B, in order to lessen and alleviate the suffering the civilians are under. And this is where we find different modus operandi in order to work with them. This said, let me say and be very clear, when we work with designated terrorist organizations, we definitely condemn, and in the harshest term, all terrorist attacks. Because terrorist attacks by nature are a blatant violation of the fundamental principle of distinction that is the bedrock, I would argue, of the laws of war. So we do this, and we do this publicly, and don't take us wrong. But then once we try to engage in a dialogue on greater respect for the fundamental principles of humanitarian law, we also engage on the question of how we can keep water, drinking water and essential sanitation services, how we can keep medical services and health services operating, and we are supporting these health services and medical services. What is different today, I would say, I know, Yasmin, you have worked in South Sudan. I've been in South Sudan at a certain stage when a number of humanitarian organizations were celebrating 30 years of permanent operational presence in South Sudan. And they were saying, well, we have been here for 3 decades, but we cannot work with the hospital in Juba. It's useless. I say, come on, what have you been doing during 3 decades in South Sudan, providing medical assistance and telling me today it's useless? So this, by good last, is changing. And humanitarian actors and the ICRC for sure is investing in supporting local health services, for instance, both access and then the management of hospital, primary health care, in order to make them more resilient, even if for a number of months we have to leave the place because of security constraints. So this is absolutely of the essence. So I think I responded also partly to the question of you know, the forces that are resolutely opposing development intervention. Now in West Africa, what we are trying to do is to engage much more investors and the financial community and the financial development community. The president of the ICRC today is precisely in the Sahel, between Chad, Niger, Mali, and then he will go to Ivory Coast. But he's traveling there with what we call frontier investors, people who are ready to take risks that go beyond the usual risks of investing in places where investors can expect a reasonable return. And we are looking at donors who are ready to de-risk to a certain level these investments, which are critical in order to offer jobs and maintain markets functioning. These are things we had never done before, and this is where we are investing now because we are convinced that we can bring greater development gains and we can help investment in agriculture, agricultural rehabilitation, but also in economic activities. We can help maintain markets as functioning institutions, even in the Sahel today, if we engage in meaningful partnership with them. So this partnership, of course, raises question of how we are perceived as a neutral, impartial humanitarian organization. We have to be very careful to that. But I think this should not refrain us from engaging and trying all what we do in order to bring response, because it's a shame we cannot leave the hundreds of millions of Africans living in the Sahel region and in West Africa, just waiting for these crises to be resolved before development take hold. Finally, in Syria, yes, I think the idea to leverage diaspora is great. We have to be humble when we look at financial flows into conflict regions. Humanitarian aid is just a small fraction of remittances. The major lifeline for livelihood of people in so many conflict zones, Afghanistan included, is remittances. And if remittances from migrants and diaspora would be cut from one day to another, which happened in Somalia to some extent with countering the financing of terrorism measures that have been abruptly implemented and which created really huge problems in the case of Somalia back then in terms of livelihood. But this would be a complete game changer for the livelihood of people. So we are working with diaspora to see how we can better leverage remittances. We are also working with diaspora sometimes, which is a bit more tricky because diaspora are also involved politically. So sometimes they are interesting to connect with in terms of connections, I would say, but we have also to be careful and to be aware of their political positioning and how this might affect our license to operate in Syria, for instance, and other contexts. Finally, of course, we spoke about local communities and gender. We have more and more interventions with women groups. In West Africa, for instance, we have worked with a lot of women's groups in terms of microcredit for horticulture, and providing them not only microcredit, but also the seeds and tools and fertilizers necessary to grow vegetables and so forth. But I would say that the newest thing that we have been doing in Central African Republic is very interesting. We have worked with women farmers, and they said we cannot access our fields. Our reaction was to say, don't worry, we will discuss with the militias. And they told us, no, don't discuss with them. Just provide us a safe space so that we can engage directly the militias, and we will explain them why they need to leave us work. And this is what we have done, and I think this is the future.
Thank you very much. I think we take another round of questions. I think I had a gentleman here, and then, we have 3 hands coming up. Okay, please, let's start at this table where the mic is. Yeah.
I'll take advantage of the mic. Sachin, first of all, thank you very much for
Could
taking
you
advantage.
introduce yourself, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
Rajat Nag, I'm with the National Council of Applied Economic Research. I was with the Asian Development Bank for a while. Sachin, thank you very much for taking advantage of Dr. Carbonier's visit to get him to talk to us. Thank you very much, Dr. Carbonier. Thanks for that excellent presentation. One point that I'd like to build on just for a moment. You made an excellent point about development being seen as long-term and humanitarian work being seen as short-term. And when I was at the ADB, this constant refrain kept coming up, and I think we failed many of our clients really by not working more closely with you, because there were issues that were more immediate, and we said, well, ICRC will take care of it. Once they've taken care of it, we'll go in when everything is safe. And that wasn't quite right. So I would strongly urge more, really, my colleagues in the development world to work more closely with you, because the gulf obviously shouldn't exist. Which leads me to the point that the work that the actors do and the triple nexus you talked about is really a continuum. And in the development world, there is a partitioning of these roles, which less of it will obviously be better. So I would strongly compliment ICRC for the efforts you make, and strongly urge my colleagues in the development banks to work more immediately and more closely with you. And thanks very much for making the point about inequality. And that, I think, is the source of many of the issues and access to justice, gender issues that you have outlined. Thank you very much for that very excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have the gentleman next to him, and then we'll come to this table.
Thank you. I am Sanjeev Srivastava. I teach at University of Delhi. I'm also a researcher on foreign policy issues. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I have a